Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me Jeff. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All the way from Houston.
All the way from Houston.
I appreciate you driving over and meeting live instead of online.
Indeed.
That's very kind of you. So you and I are fairly new acquaintances. Just before the show, you were telling me about 10 years out of college, you were written a 7-figure check, and that started to change your world. Probably not in the way the viewers imagine. So unpack that story a little bit.
Perhaps that's true. Well, just for some context, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was actually a business guy, an engineer, MBA, and career was going great. And in his late 20s, he sort of felt the call to go to seminary. And so he went back to seminary, became a pastor, and was sort of Mr. Fix-It for the Presbyterian Church. And but he hung out with a lot of business guys because he's very comfortable with business people. And I kind of related more to those guys. I kept thinking, is God going to call me into, being a pastor at a church or not? And it very clearly did not. I really felt called into business. And so I went to Trinity University here in San Antonio and got a job with Arthur Anderson in Houston. And I just kind of put my head down, and I was kind of with a high-achieving bunch of people, and made my way over to the wealth management business and kind of put my head down there and build a business. And as I was telling you before we started recording, I knew all the sort of Christian things to say. And I even meant them in terms of, like I always thought, well, my dad maybe in a church, he could know maybe 100 families what's going on. Well, if I could get 100 families in the wealth management business and treat them really well, that'd be a good business. I could really be a blessing to them. But I think what I realized by that story you're expressing were, after 8 years at Payne Webber, we took the team to Morgan Stanley, and they wrote me the 7-figure check to walk across the street and bring the business over there. And I remember the guy handing me the check, and he was all very excited about, what are you going to do with this check? And I really had no plans for it. But I realized that I was kind of chasing that check more than I cared to even admit to myself. And so it was like I felt like the dog kind of caught the car. Well, now what am I supposed to do? And I had this sort of crisis of purpose. Like, I guess I'm supposed to be more excited about it. It didn't actually energize me the way I thought it might. And I thought, man, I think my ladder's on the wrong wall. I'm not quite sure what wall it's on or which one it should be on. And so I kind of went through this soul-searching period in my early 30s of what was that about? What is my purpose? And I even kind of did a bunch of, do I even believe this Christianity stuff? I was like, there's probably answers from Jesus in this, but I felt like I had, I'm 31. I felt like I was kind of trading on my dad had a, doctorate in this stuff, and everybody just sort of assumed I knew everything about the Bible. I just knew like a second grader's version of Bible stories, And so I really didn't have the biblical knowledge to solve this problem I had. And so I kind of studied all these world religions that didn't really make sense. I read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and he's now a good friend. It's really been a blessing in my life. And that book really helped solidify, okay, Christianity is the right place to find the answers, but I really need to study it. And so I told you I signed up for Bible study fellowships, and people watching this may have gone through that. It's just blocking and tackling Bible study, I think, down the middle. And that was really good for me. So I started, at that time, it was a 7-year deal. It was like, I think it's 9 years now. But you really cover most of the Bible going through that, and did a little daily study, a group every week. And so I just encourage people to go down that path, not necessarily BSF, which was great, but some kind of deep Bible study and daily. I hadn't really done that before. And God really clearly, in about a year and a half into that 7-year process, revealed to me very clearly, he was yelling through his word what my problem was, which was I had a little g God before him, which was worldly success. And that mirror, I really thought I was a pretty good person, actually, until I started studying the Bible. I realized I'm not nearly as good as I thought, and I do not like that reflection that Bible held up, and especially that part about, if I was really being honest with myself, I was chasing worldly success more than God. And so he really switched my heart on that, and I started trying to change my priorities, and there are a lot of stories about that. But that was a real turning point for me.
Did you Was there a sense building toward that moment, or was it like this aha, just one day you realize little G's in the way?
Yeah, it was every week there would be a verse that, frankly, if we read it here, would probably 99 out of 100 people would not say that's about stewardship or that God owns it all. But it's like everything I read, that's all I could see. Like, you know what I mean? I just saw the same red truck everywhere. God owns it all. God owns it all. God owns it all. You need to follow him, not yourself. And so there were other moments along the way, like when I knew I wanted to do Bible study, I didn't know which one to do. And God's so good. I mean, he's so far ahead of me all the time. It's just sort of ridiculous. But at the time, my oldest daughter was in second grade, and we would go to church, and we'd get out of church. We're driving to lunch, and she's in the back seat. And I remember, like 3 weeks in a row, I'd be like, "Allie, what'd you learn in Sunday school?" I mean, she's in second grade. Okay, she's like, "Well, I made this." Pull up a picture, and I was just like looking in the rearview mirror, going, "Really? Like, drew a picture? And like, you didn't even learn anything. You just scribbled." And she could she's very high EQ. She could kind of read my frustration. And this went on like 3 weeks in a row. It was just weird, this little period where and then she'd show whatever her little art and craft was from that. And I was all judgy. I was being those second grade volunteer teachers, for crying out loud. What are they teaching her? They're not teaching her anything. And man, I just felt like God said, really? Like it's their job? That's your job. And I was like, but I don't know anything. And literally, when I had that revelation on that third Sunday, I walk into the office, literally the next day. It's crazy. And a guy that I worked with invited me, and he says, we're starting a class at BSF. Would you like to be in it? And we also have a class for second graders. But you have to kind of bring your daughter. Like, is that okay? And I was like, this is crazy. Like he's so far ahead, right? So he's just, hey, thank you for finally getting it. I've been preparing all these things. All you have to do is agree. And I mean, like the door's wide open for these things. So it was a process, but I'm always the obstacle. God is so generous to be ready to embrace us all and give us the truth if we're willing. And then it's a process of learning more about that, deepening that faith and that trust.
So you're going through this spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Concurrently, where are you in your business life?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I had this sort of revelation, I was like, God owns it all. Like I just got to be all in for him. And I was like, what are we doing? That's where I sort of got my worldview set. I was like, okay, let me turn my attention to our clients. Like, what am I teaching our wealth management clients about their money that might be antithetical to what I'm learning in the Bible? And I was like, it's kind of a scary thing to even consider. Like, maybe I've been doing this thing wrong for 10 years, And one of the things I got convicted about was like we would build financial plans for people. And I wouldn't say it overtly, but it was kind of implied by the process that, okay, here's the pile you've got. You keep saving. It gets to this number. And then you can quit working and rely on your pile. And biblically, I don't think we're supposed to rely on our pile of money. I think we're supposed to rely on God.
Yeah.
He can take the pile if he wants to take the pile. And so I started saying things like that to people, and strangely, they weren't really that put off. I think it kind of opened up this conversation. I had a friend challenge me through a training thing that I was in, a leadership training thing, where I was addicted, by the way. This is all part of that performance stuff, success as my scorecard. Every day I walked into the office, I would hit a button. It literally said scorecard. The button said scorecard. Boop, scorecard. And up would say where I ranked globally in the firm by, assets and revenue. And I would hit it like it changes every day. It doesn't change every day. It's just a total addiction. Okay. And I had a friend of mine, Christian brother, challenged me. He said, okay, you got to stop. You got to stop hitting that button every day. But like most addictions, you got to replace it maybe with something healthier. And so we worked together, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start a notebook. I'm not going to hit that button, but when I feel that like I should hit the button. I'm going to get out this little journal. I'm going to start writing down any spiritual conversation. I mean, if even I asked somebody where they went to church, I mean, that would count. Ooh, I asked them. That would be like to retrain my brain to have a different scorecard. And I did it for like 30 days, and it really did change. There's all those things about how 30 days to change a habit or whatever. It really did work, and it kind of built a little bit of a muscle. And I was real nervous about bringing that stuff up because I really hadn't brought it up for 10 years. I never prayed with a client in a meeting, any of that stuff. And it kind of made me bolder because people kind of enjoyed these conversations, And I started praying with people. I'd write that down, And then one day I walked into my manager's office and I was like, hey, listen, I'm going to start telling people their money isn't their money. I'm going to do it in this biblical way. And it's a super secular firm. I'm Morgan Stanley at the time. Ended up there 17 years. And I was like, so I don't know, my business might totally crater. I just wanted to let you know that if it totally craters, this is this is why. He's like, thank you? What was he supposed to say to that? He was a believer. But it was just sort of this process of opening up these conversations about kind of who owns it. And, kind of what was their purpose and these kind of purposeful conversations. And frankly, I thought it might ruin the business. And it's not like the business skyrocketed after that. I'd love to tell you that.
It just didn't tank.
It didn't tank, which I was thankful for.
It's a step in the right direction.
And then the conversations were more meaningful. So I felt like my relationships were getting better. And then I was sort of teaching these principles that God was teaching me, and they were being received well. So it's just very encouraging to kind of keep going down that path. So that's the immediate change.
You bring up a point as I talk with Christian business leaders in particular, but really anybody of whatever faith they're of.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're nervous to talk about their faith in the marketplace. What's been your experience as you've opened up? I mean, everybody imagines I'm going to end up in lawsuits. I'm going to end up on CNN. I'm going to be thrown in jail. Has that been your experience?
Well, such a good question. So I talked about Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, helping me in my early 30s. Lee actually has moved to Houston, and we became friends, and I started chairing his board a few years ago, Lee Strobel Ministries. And so I've gotten this insight because of him and that board, and Mark Middleberg and Jerry Johnson is involved there. These guys are true evangelists, and that's an area that I want to get better in. I'm not as gifted as those guys are, but Mark Middleberg, he'll be watching this, and I'll give a shout out to Mark. He's like, but it's everybody's responsibility. You just have to use your own God-given personality. And I think one of the things those guys have really taught me is that, because they've done all these surveys, Barna's done all these surveys, the fallacy that those of us that are sometimes fearful to get into these spiritual conversations is that people aren't interested. And actually, the data says that 80% of people you talk to are interested, actually, in having this conversation. Now, they may not, agree with all of even Christianity or your worldview, but they're not hostile to the idea of having the discussion. So I think if you had asked me before I'd met these guys, what percentage of people, I'm like, 20%? Less? So I think I just had it backwards, and that created this sort of fear, and then you have this fear around, maybe I don't say things right, or they ask me a question I can't answer, or I still harbor, some of those things. But I've just learned that even from that little experience where I was like, am I allowed to bring up where they go to church? I used to send happy holiday cards. That's embarrassing, but if somebody sent me a Hanukkah card, I'm like, oh, good for them. They sent me, and I was like, so why am I afraid to send a Merry Christmas card? Just these little things that were held back. They're artificial. They don't actually exist.
Yeah.
And, I'm in a C12 group, and I think C12 does a great job of kind of teaching where that line is and encouraging you to do things. And you have to do things that are legal and winsome and all of those things. There's some lines you can't cross. But I think those lines are way further out there than at first we believe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was my experience in corporate life. There was no HR policy that said I couldn't talk about my faith, but we just didn't.
Exactly. But it did get to a point eventually where we did have to get out of that situation, and that might be an interesting place to take.
Yeah. So as you're starting to wrestle with, you're in the business world.
Yeah.
You start to see and feel like I got to do things different. There was this initial concern everything's going to tank. It doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah, that is a good thing.
Kind of what was the next major hurdle?
Yeah,
so to speak.
So it's so fascinating. Things are so much clearer when you look back on them, right, than when you're living them. So I sort of think of this first 10 years of my career as just doing it my way, which, just kind of led to emptiness, frankly. And then sort of the next 10 years of sort of basic training from God of, okay, I need to do it his way. And then after 10 years, you sort of build a little bit of muscle that, oh, wow, I can trust doing it his way. It actually works out way better than my way. And so you just build a little bit of that muscle. And so in sort of 2000 is where I had that turning point and really started studying things. In 2010, I was with a mentor of mine, Ron Blue, who had created a wealth management company on biblical principles in 1979. And he had asked me to be a coach for the Kingdom Advisor coaching program, where we would coach other financial advisors on how to implement biblical wisdom into their process. But he asked me in 2007, and I said, I'll do it, but I'm as much a player as I am a coach. I said, how about I fly into Atlanta early? It was like everybody flew in once a quarter for like 24 hours. How about if I fly in early, and how about you disciple me in the mornings, and then we'll go to the coaching program? And he generously did that with me for 3 years. That was really awesome. Super generous of him to do that with me. And the last session we had together in 2010, so this was after 10 years of trying to do it God's way, I had this just crazy experience that's never happened before or since. And like I was telling you before we started recording, I don't know the theology of it. I'm just sort of like the blind man who can see. I'm just going to tell the story the way it happened. I'm sitting there in this coffee shop, the Atlanta Airport Hilton. Like how there's certain snapshots in your life. Like I can picture the scene as I'm telling you the story. Nobody else at the coffee shop. It's stupid early in the morning. And Ron says this thing about how everything he starts gets bigger and better after he leaves, because he's just this classic visionary. And he talked about the business he had started and how much revenue it was doing. And I remember the whole revenue of that firm that he had founded was less than the revenue of one office of Morgan Stanley in Houston, and there were 6 such offices. So Morgan Stanley at that time was probably doing about $300 million of wealth management revenue in Houston, and his business was doing about $50 million. And I thought, man, here's my mentor, who's brilliant. He knows everything about the Bible and money, everything about advising people on how to use their money in a biblical manner, but it's not scaled. It should be scaled. Like, why isn't there a top 10 firm in the nation? And so I'm like having these thoughts, and then I literally heard God say to me, I don't understand the theology of it. I don't care. I heard it. God's like, I want you to scale what this guy started. I literally, like, just like we're sitting here, I go to Ron, I go, did you hear that? Like, I've never asked anybody, like, did they hear that before? I literally thought for sure he heard it. Yeah, like, it was so loud in my head.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. And then I literally turned over both shoulders, and I was like, maybe I caught a glancing blow for somebody. Like, somebody behind me can do this. Nobody else at the coffee shop. So that was pretty obvious. And then, like, how you have like these little conversations, like it was just sort of, I knew this wasn't audible to Ron, but I'm sort of having this 15-second, like, I'm like, whoa, like lightning bolt moment. And I'm like, this is kind of like that 10 years of me being stupid in business and 10 years of trying to do it his way. It kind of all flashed before my eyes, like these memories with, and then I was like, man, this is like so amazing. Like, I know this was custom made for me. It was just this beautiful, intimate moment. And then the next thought was, I got 5 people on my team. I mean, we have a big team, and I've never scaled anything. And I'm like, and I remember, and I go, so what am I supposed to do with that? I don't know. I don't know how to do that. And it just like a sweet, I never forget the feeling I had. Like a sweet grandfather. I felt like God was saying, chuckling, like you're not mad at the grandkid for being clueless.
Right. He's
like, I know you don't know how to do it. I'll do it. You wake up and take instructions and give me the credit. I was like, well, I can do that. And so this is 2010. And now What he didn't say, and remember, I'm an old recovering accountant, so I'm de-risking everything. And it's daily bread now, right? So he's not like, okay, well, here's the whole business plan, and here's what it's going to look like. He's like, so tomorrow, wake up, and I'll tell you enough for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next day, I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? I was so excited. I was like on cloud nine that day. And then I'm like, okay, but I don't know. What am I supposed to do? And I had started this little Christian focus group at Morgan Stanley. We had about 150 members. I'd host a little conference call once a month. But it wasn't recognized by the firm. It was sort of a grassroots deal.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, we didn't say start my own company. So maybe scale what this guy started. Okay, well, I'm already in a scaled environment. Maybe I can affect the culture. Let's see how far we can affect the culture for Christ inside Morgan Stanley. And so I actually did that for 7 more years. We got the group. They're all kind of God stories. We got the group officially recognized by the firm, a bit of a horse trade. That's a whole nother story. We got it up to 600 members.
Wow.
And it's going great. And then there were just some things. We don't have time for the whole story. Wrote the book, but about it. But at the end of the day, it just became clear that we were not going to flip the culture to a Christ-centered culture. Mm-hmm. And so I remember the next day after that became very clear. I'm on my knees, just like I try to do every morning, and get my instructions. And I was like, I'm sorry, God, I failed. Like, you told me, you gave me this awesome idea, and it's not working. And I must be doing something wrong. Like, it's not working. And I just remember him going, I didn't say it had to be there. And I was like, oh. I knew what that meant. Like, I can't go to Goldman. I'm just going to be the same. I'd figured out how Wall Street operated at that point. And so I knew we had to start our own firm. So it took me about a year, and we launched a firm. And so not everybody, you were talking about in the corporate culture, how do you behave? If you're in a big public company or even a private company, I mean, there's certain rules, but I think there's a long way we can go before you bump into issues. Mm-hmm. But I bumped into them. Mm. I got to as far as I could inside that entity as I could get to. And I felt like God was calling me out. Now, I have friends that are still there fighting the battle. They feel called to fight the battle. Good. That's cool, man. I'm not saying everybody needs to leave and create their own thing. That was the thing that he told me to do. Mm-hmm. And so now we're just building a whole wealth management business on sort of a Christ-centered platform with the idea of scale. So it's been really fun it's just the next phase in the journey. Just what's he going to tell me tomorrow? I hope I'm obedient.
Yeah. So little diversion here. Sure. Some of us on the podcast or watching the podcast may have interacted with financial wealth managers over the years. Is there a handful of bullets that make the typical financial plan different than a biblically based one? Like what would the things should I be asking my financial planner?
So good. Great questions. Well, there's 3, and I'll add a 4th because I kind of know where you are on a worldview standpoint. But let me say there's 4 questions that I would say that most financial planners or wealth management people do not ask, that I would suggest that people, if they're not being asked, ask themselves, and maybe even bring it up with their financial advisor, which is, the first question is, who owns it? So this idea that I had wrong early in my career of who's in charge. Mm-hmm. I was kind of thinking I was in charge.
Well, you're the one that made all the money.
Exactly. And then I would say, well, here's my business plan. God, will you bless my business plan? Mm-hmm. It was 100% my plan. Mm-hmm. Okay. And amazingly, that didn't work.
Surprise.
Yeah. And so this idea of who owns it, key. Because that puts you in a position, if you admit that, or find a place where God does own everything, owns cattle on 1,000 hills, owns everything, all the gold is his, all the silver is his. If that's true, now you're in a stewardship, not an ownership position. And actually, even in the investment world, when I would deal with sort of endowment committees, the returns were always better than the individuals who were really emotional about their investments. Because those committees, it wasn't their money. And they could make sort of dispassionate, really logical decisions about the investments. Mm-hmm. So I actually argue that thinking as a steward, not an owner, actually makes you a better investor, actually, for one thing. So get the ownership issue right. So who owns it? Let's get clear on that. Second question then, that very few financial planning people ask, is how much is enough for you, and if you're married, your wife? Is there a financial finish line? That's a very countercultural question.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it assumes there might be one.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
how much do you need?
yeah, the person with the most toys wins. Like, one more dollar. Like, I'm not rich, the next guy's rich. Like, I live in a neighborhood and I got X million dollars, but that person's got 10X what I've got. I'm not, what do you mean? I'm just trying to keep up. And they wouldn't say, keep up with the Joneses. I know that's an expression, it's a negative expression, but that's kind of how we behave.
Mm-hmm.
If I earn more, I just spend more. Is there ever a time where you stop and that's enough? It's a fascinating thought exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And so, by the way, there is nothing in the Bible, I've looked, that says, here's the proper lifestyle and just for inflation. It's a thing where you have to ask God,
Mm-hmm.
how much is enough?
Mm-hmm.
He's the owner, you're the steward. How much does the steward get to spend on himself or herself?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting question, not asked a lot. Third question would be, this is the number one question we get from clients. The number one question we get is, how do I not ruin my kids?
Mm.
Too much money.
Mm-hmm.
Because we tend to have pretty successful clients. That's a tough one too.
Mm-hmm.
The normal estate planning attorney, no offense to them, this is their job, is to know the law and kind of a turnkey transaction. But, you generally take your net worth, divide by the number of kids you got, and that's it. Divvy it up. Well, maybe that's the right number. Maybe that's not the right number for them. Mm-hmm. So we always talk about loving kids equally, but maybe you treat them differently depending on their situation. So thinking through how much is enough for the kids, that's actually a big and difficult topic. Mm-hmm. Again, I would say talk to your spouse if you're married and ask the owner. He knows how much mm-hmm. is enough for them. So wrestling with that. And then, okay, you've established who the owner is. Maybe you've set a finish line for yourself. Maybe you've set a finish line for the kids. Is there money left over? Is there some amount of money that you have that's above what you need to supply your needs and the kids' needs? And you're thinking, well, yeah, maybe I'll be generous with that when I'm dead. Okay? And we would say, well, if you're going to give it away when you're dead, I'm not sure how much fun that is, A. Sort of tongue-in-cheek, but also accurate, I think, biblically. I'm not sure you get credit for that. There's not a lot of sacrifice in that.
Good point.
You don't, because there is actually, as Randy Alcorn says, I would suggest his books to everybody, Money, Possessions, and Eternity, The Treasure Principles. He's, to me, the best author on this topic. His key line is, you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. Mm-hmm. In other words, the giving you do in this world, actually you do get rewarded for in the next world. That's theology that I hadn't heard for a long time, and I've really enjoyed kind of going down that rabbit trail. I would encourage people to do that. But, so do it while you're alive. There's so many benefits. By the way, there's a ton of tax benefits. It's way more fun. Mm-hmm. It's also biblical that where your treasure is, your heart will be also. It gets you really involved in things outside of yourself. It can also be, so there's joy in it. You get credit for it later. Tax benefits. Also, you get to include your family. So there's all kinds of interesting ways to include your kids, grandkids, if you've got them, in that kind of thing, and start modeling these things. And I think one of the big problems with money is that if you make some, people don't know how to communicate amongst generations. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many people do we know where they're? I mean, I'm picturing people in my head right now where people are like, no, we don't talk about it. And then somebody inherits a pile of money and they have no training, no modeling, no communication, weren't able to plan for it. They're ill-equipped. So you could almost add that as a fifth question. So who owns it? How much is enough for you? How much is enough for the kids? What would you do with the excess? And then maybe the last one is, is the next generation prepared? Maybe as a subsidiary question to the how much is enough for them. But if you determine how much is enough and it's something, you should probably start preparing them. What does that look like? So anyway, communication, around these issues and in families is a big issue. So
When you say prepare the next generation, are there tools and resources out there for those conversations?
yeah, I'll just give you one. One exercise we do with families is something we call the 5 capitals, which is sometimes, especially in our business, where we get paid to manage the money, and then we try to do some of this other planning and family communication as additional services around that. Inheritance, and capital is not just financial capital. So there's intellectual capital, there's spiritual capital, there's character capital, there's relational capital. So sometimes we'll have these family meetings where we've actually asked each child to share, what have you received in each of those categories?
Mm.
And even if you don't have kids, and maybe you never do, what would you like to pass on to others? How would you like to translate, be generous to other people with those capitals?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting exercise of like blessings you've received, because we think so much about inheritance being money, especially in our business.
Mm-hmm.
Broadening the definition of what a full inheritance is
Mm.
in all of those categories. And so we've had families that are like, even if they don't have a lot of money, they're like, oh, I actually feel better about, I have given my kids a full inheritance,
Mm-hmm.
even if the money's smaller. I've done a pretty good job in some of these other areas. And so we think that's amazing. Another thing we've seen some amazing healing between the generations by having the parents write a letter of blessing to their children.
Mm.
And so sometimes I'm thinking of a family in San Antonio that we had where father and son were not on the same page. And the father was thinking about cutting the son out of the will. Just very different lifestyle, political views, these kind of things. They're just at odds. And we, instead of, kind of cutting them out of the will, we just went through this exercise where all the kids, including the son, talked about those capitals. And then we had mom and dad write a letter of blessing to all 3 children, all positive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we all have
Mm-hmm.
criticisms of each other and all that, and that's not the place. Blessing. What do we see that's amazing in them? And it reconciled that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So just tools to communicate,
Mm.
Really in positive ways,
Mm-hmm.
to get back on the same page a little bit. That's the joy for us. That's why the folks at our company tend to be employed there. It's missional.
Is there? This is a long shot here that you'll have an answer for this one. Is there? Is there a number that you've seen either through experience or through data that number and up tends to run the next generation?
So fascinating. You're not alone in wanting that number. We're recording this in the afternoon. At lunch, we basically got asked that question by 2 partners who are in their business having financial success. And he essentially asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, is it kind of a smaller number or is it kind of a bigger number?
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, it can be from 0 to the biggest number you can imagine. It truly has nothing to do empirically on what that is. Now, we had an event one time with a father-son, and the father's been very successful financially. His father was very successful. He's got his son there, who at the time was about 30. He was about 60. And he had a great line. He said, if I leave my son $100 million, and I think he's a better steward than me, that could be the right move. All of it. If I think he'll waste $1 that I give him, then $1 is too much.
Mm.
And it's a simple kind of illustration, but I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
We always say if you've seen one family business, you've seen one family and one family business. Like, they're all different.
Mm-hmm.
God gives us all a different level of resources, a different family dynamic, a different purpose. And the way we work that out should drive us toward Him to ask Him,
Mm-hmm.
what's that unique answer for us?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were just talking about this the other day, Jesus got asked hundreds of questions, and he mostly responded with more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think he only answered a couple of them, And so I would love to have the right answer for everybody. Here's the standard, but the longer we do it this way, the more we realize there aren't templates. It's a one size fits one situation, and it drives you back to the owner to ask specifically, what am I supposed to do?
So going back to the owner, obviously God knows the answer before you ask it. So literally he could give you the answer in 0 time.
Yeah.
But we humans often get in the way of hearing his answer.
Well said.
Is there like if I were going to book a meeting with one of your guys tomorrow and I've got millions of assets, is this a 2-hour conversation? Is this a 2-year conversation? Like what's an expectation for something properly done, well done?
Yeah. It depends on the it depends on the complexity, I would say, of how many meetings it takes, how long those meetings are. I think we're building the reputation of the business on. I know that you're leading multiple C12 groups, so like for us, the ideal client is some C12 member who's having an exit and who wants to now what? Okay. Usually we start those kind of relationships with literally we call it a whiteboard session because that's not really a product. We don't really have a product to sell other than we're sort of applying for the COO job of the net worth balance sheet, And so a lot of times they're selling the business. They had a good COO. Now who's the COO of the pile? That's sort of the job. So to do that, one of the phrases we use is for all clients of all sizes, narrative over numbers. One of the questions we'll often ask is, what's your first memory of money? And we had one person say, I have a picture. I'm sitting on the couch. I'm 8 years old with my brother, and there's a car driving by, and the neighborhood kids are pointing their fingers out and laughing at us. I'm like, you're on the couch? Like, how are you seeing? He's like, no, the couch is on the front yard because we've been foreclosed upon for the 3rd time.
Wow.
Okay, you might want to know that before you get into an investment discussion, that safety and security might be important to that person.
Yeah.
Or they've been through 3 divorces and trust is an issue, or you know what I mean, or having their own money, or okay. If you don't, you always start with the narrative, and often people come in with tactical questions. Should I do a foundation or don't advise fund? I'm like, whoa. So what's your name? And so getting the full narrative really helps you understand what is the overall sort of strategy that you're trying to do. And so, usually it's really complicated. There's sometimes 5 meetings to kind of get to that place. Other people, it's 2 or 3 meetings, depending on the complexity or how many people are involved and that sort of thing. But that's really, the key there is an ongoing thing, so it's not transactional because things change. Kids grow up, grandkids happen, different things happen in business. And so I think it's also important to stay flexible, and not do too many irrevocable things too early.
Yeah.
So
You said something a moment ago, kind of should take us a different direction, I think, in some ways. You said having your own money. It's a conversation a lot of millennials and younger. You talk to them, we're going to get married, and she's got her job and her bank account. I got my job and my bank account. I'm a little more old school, like everything in common. What are you running into? What are your thoughts around separate bank accounts and all those kinds of things?
Yeah, what comes to my mind, and maybe this is tangential, but I'll just follow my instincts of as the Spirit leads here a little bit. But the big issue lately that we've been dealing with is, which is related, is daughters. So I have 2 daughters, and it's been fascinating to watch. There's this sort of idea with all kids, boys and girls, but especially with daughters that, if you're doing your estate planning, you're trying to move assets to the next generation, you create trust for your kids. But it's in the name of your kid. It's not in the name of your kid and their spouse. Because what if they get divorced? You want it to stay with the family, right? This is a typical down the middle planning technique. But we have seen the tape, doing this 30 years, we have seen the tape of what can happen in that situation. And so we had a situation once where some clients' daughter is marrying a wonderful guy who's a worship leader, doesn't make a lot of money. And they thought, we have a lot of money. A wonderful wedding gift would be a house for them, for their wedding. Sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, son-in-law cannot afford the taxes on the house, let alone the utilities and the upkeep and it's way more than they could ever afford on their own. And now, I think most men are programmed to be providers, and you're kind of taking that away to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen other situations. I had a guy that I worked with years ago on a different team, and he said, Jeff, why don't you come have a glass of wine with me after work with one of my buddies. I said, oh, sounds good. I said, what's the topic? He goes, it's a meeting of the RWC, and he kind of winks at me. And I go, what's the RWC? He goes, it's the Royal Whaling Club. Knew that wasn't true, but I didn't know what was going on. Go over to his buddy's house, just a ridiculous house, giant wine cellar, grabs a nice bottle of wine. We all, just the three of us, sit down, and he goes, okay, I'm calling to order the meeting of the RWC. And I go, okay, what does it actually mean? He's like, Rich Wives Club. Okay. And both of them had married women with large trust funds. And they would just regale me with these stories of the power struggle, which it can turn into. Mm-hmm. I've got this much, you've got that much. I'm sure I am not an expert on that topic of the psychological effects of having, but I have been a witness to the power of one person having a lot more than another, especially the wife having a lot more. And in one case of these, both of them ended up getting divorces, pretty tragic. But the guy I was closest to, his wife wanted to move from Houston to England and have a equestrian farm and ride horses with the daughters. And he said, well, my business is in Houston. Well, she took the kids anyway. She had the money and ended up in divorce. And so I'm not saying that you don't leave money to your daughter in a trust just in their name. That's not the point. But think through the implications, not just the template. Mm-hmm. So I would say the same thing of separate bank accounts. Okay, on paper, hey, fewer arguments. Let me do my thing. We'll contribute and maybe for some people that's okay. I don't want to be formulaic really about much. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I keep driving people down. What does God tell you to do? But I would argue for the marriage before anything else, and some level of shared understanding of budgets and that sort of thing feels like unity, feels like conflict's available, and feels like maybe working through that conflict might be healthy. Mm-hmm. That's just my bias. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But we do have clients with separate ones, especially ones who have been divorced before and have been burnt, and that works for them. So I've seen it work. I have a little bias against it because I think it's healthy to kind of have a shared budget and shared goals. And if you can't see each other, how do you are you really communicating? And I think communication in marriage can be hard,
sure,
but working through it can be healthy. So,
yeah, my wife and I, when we first got married, I took care of the budget almost exclusively without her. She didn't like that arrangement, and I was busy climbing the corporate ladder and working crazy hours. So I said, okay, you're in charge, and keep me posted kind of thing. Okay. I didn't really like that arrangement. Yeah. So we found the right mix for us probably 15, 20 years ago. I've lost track of time, but where we literally sit down and have a meeting every week and talk about, okay, what did we spend this last week? What's the plan for next week? Do we need to adjust anything going forward? And that's created literally when we first started, we didn't look forward to the meeting because it was going to end up in an argument. It was going to end up in conflict. It was yelling at each other, sad to say. And so, but we were committed, like, hey, we'll do this again next week, and it's going to be 3 hours of knockdown, drag out misery. And okay, let's do it again next week, but now it's actually a strong probably in our marriage is probably one of the stronger pillars of our
Love
marriage.
it.
Because we were willing to do the hard work and we look back now and go, look at the thousands and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars
Oh, yeah.
that we wasted through not stewarding it well.
Mm.
Because I didn't want to mess with it because it was a hot topic. She didn't want to mess with it because it was a hot topic. Let me manage it, let her manage it, whatever, but let's just not talk about it. Well, in not talking about it, we wasted all kinds of money.
Okay, you just hit on something that is absolutely huge. One of the things we've been talking about this week, we're meeting with all kinds of folks, families in San Antonio, and the topic that comes up, has been coming up in every meeting, is this simple idea, and you just said something that's super important. This family communication issue. Families generally do not know how to talk with spouses or with their kids or grandkids about money. Okay? It's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason the money disappears in 3 generations is usually not bad planning or tax planning or investments, lack of communication.
Mm.
And the reason we started this firm, really, God told us to do it, but the one thing we do differently, I would say, is simply the world kind of locks down this communication. So if God plants these ideas of generosity in you and your wife's hearts, and you sort of take it to a financial advisor, and if it's a little delicate, and they go, well, why would anybody give away that much money? I've literally been in these meetings where somebody said that. You can easily kind of crush the whole thing, and then let's just go back to not talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, these are amazing, this is great, let's foster that communication. What is God telling you individually as a couple? There's these amazing things and plans that could be made together, just like you encourage C12 companies to have vision, mission, strategy, because it galvanizes and you can make more progress if you're clear on where you're going. So bringing some of that same strategy to your family, just basic, which is you're having a management meeting about vision, mission, values, where are we trying to go, what's the strategy. You don't have to be as formal maybe with all of the stuff, but if you can get on that same page, more ground is taken. Your purpose is better fulfilled individually, as a couple, as a family. It's just magnificent to give oxygen to those ideas, as you've done sort of the hard work to do. Yeah.
It was more than hard work.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of pain and misery.
Oh, that's
And if
true.
my wife were sitting here and she's been on my podcast, she
Yeah.
would totally agree.
Yeah, yes.
Well, Jeff, we just barely scratched the surface. I'm going to have you back. Maybe one of these months you're back in town. Love to have you back and talk more about this stuff, but we're out of time for today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's been nice getting to know you a little bit,
Likewise.
and we'll definitely have you back. Thanks a lot, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Sure.
All right.